Howdy, listeners. This is Christopher Sky-Sunderer. So this is just going to be a mini episode today. It's a segment that I recorded that was originally going to be the opening segment of episode 13, the episode I'm still working on. And the way episode 13 was originally going to run was going to be this segment, which covers the thorough beatdown that Dan Crenshaw handed renowned pedophile, owner of Kid Love Productions, Bill Maher, on Bill Maher's show. Okay, and then the second segment was going to be a bunch of COVID-19 stuff. And then, of course, the final segment of the show was listener questions. Well, I got this done, and as I was going, this segment, the Crenshaw-Maher segment done, and then as I was working on segment 2, I reconnected with some sources, old sources that I haven't been in contact with since late 2016 when I was initially investigating Pizzagate, is how far back that goes. And I went down a couple rabbit holes I wasn't expecting to go down. And as a result, what episode 13 is now going to be about is much deeper and involving a lot more research and a lot more legwork. So, but I didn't want to lose, the moment as far as what this segment's about. So before that sort of media event vanishes down the memory hole forever, I thought I would put this out there. Episode 13 is still very much happening, very much in production. It's going to be coming out next week. And we'll see you then. All right, on with it. Welcome to the Sunder the Sky podcast. I am your host, Christopher Sky-Sunderer, coming to you from my fortified bunker deep beneath the streets of Kent, Ohio. Man, where to begin today? Well, let's start with this.
I'm talking about the person who is the leader of the country at a time of crisis. And we have to go through what he actually has done. This is important stuff. It's about life and death, and it's about our economy and everything that's really important. It's not tweets and it's not style. Let's just go through the timeline, okay? Because he was warned. This did not have to happen. Alex Azar, his Health and Human Services guy, January 18th, he warned him about this. And again on January 30th, Trump said he was being an alarmist. Peter Navarro, somebody else who talks to Trump a lot, told him directly, January 29th, you got to get ahead of this. February 10th.
2 days later, he implemented a restrictive travel ban from China, which he was widely criticized for. That same day, on January 31st, Nancy Pelosi proposed the No Ban Act, which would be congressional limitation on what President Trump's actually able to do with that travel restriction.
Okay, but he lies about that. First of all, he didn't.
How does he lie about it? What do you mean?
He said he stopped people coming in from China. He did not. He said he was ahead of it. 43 countries did it before we did. There are still people coming in from China. He only stopped foreign nationals.
Yeah, okay, let me address that, because I know that's what people are saying right now. But the reality is, it was about 40,000 people came in after that. These were U.S. citizens and green card holders and passport holders being repatriated. U.S. citizens. So you have to make the argument then that we shouldn't allow them in. I mean, it sounds to me like you're fully agreeing with President Trump on this when everybody else disagreed with him. And if you're saying that you wish that travel restriction had been more extreme, okay, fine. You apparently had the foresight back then, but when nobody else did. But the fact is, if Joe Biden was in charge at that moment, he's already said he wouldn't have done it. He criticized it at the time. Nancy Pelosi actually proposed legislation to stop it.
Okay, so, but people are still coming in from China. It wasn't just foreign nationals, but let's get off that. Let me just go back to the timeline for a minute. February 10th, after these warnings, he says it's going to go away in April with the heat because he had a hunch. February 25th, he goes to India. This is 4 days after the White House Coronavirus Task Force said we're going to have to lock down the country, and Dr. Nancy Messonnier, who's in charge of the Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. Wait a second, let me just finish. She announced this on the 26th. On the 25th, that we were going to have to lock down the country. He said the next day, 15 people have it, and it's soon going to be close to zero. March 6th, he said anyone who wants a test can get it, which is still
Okay, let me stick to February
completely
as
wrong.
you go forward, because you mentioned February 25th. The day before, February 24th, that's when the administration requested $2.5 billion from Congress to fulfill, CDC, NIH, and FDA funding to combat the virus and the potential spread of it. What happened right then? I'll tell you because I was in Congress and I know what happened. Did we vote on a supplemental funding bill? No. Did we wait days to vote? No, still didn't vote on it. You know what we voted on later that week? Nancy Pelosi, the only thing she would put on the floor to vote on was a bill to ban flavored tobacco. That's what actually happened. It was only a week later that we actually voted on the supplemental funding that the administration requested. Your criticism appears to be based in one thing, that Trump was overly optimistic. That's his style. Again, you can criticize it. That's fine. But it's not connected to the actions that were actually taken. Because if I back up even further, February 14th, CDC announces ongoing work with 5 laboratories to perform community-based influenza surveillance and study the spread of the virus. We're in a fact-finding mode in February. People forget this. People keep calling February this lost month. But it's really not. That's an easy and cheap accusation because there's no big, bold moves taken like there was in January or like there was in March. But the reality is our government was working to create that test. Now, did they work as fast as we would have liked? And of course not. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm happy to go into. By March 3rd, there was only 102 cases in the United States. And yet I'm hearing criticism that we should have been locked down weeks earlier. But would you think the American people would have accepted that with only 100 cases in the United States? Italy didn't lock down until March 10th. Spain, not until March 14th. UK, not until later in March. Places like Sweden's never locked down. And so I provide all of that context as we try to basically accuse this man of he's being accused of having blood on his hands. And context is so important here.
Well, it is. And also, it's not just about being optimistic, it's about being right. The world was aware of this. And since when does America take its lead from Italy and Spain?
Well, because those were where the outbreaks were happening.
I understand.
Right? Well, I'm pointing it out again for context. But if we're going to criticize somebody's actions, we have to do it in the context of the facts they knew at the time. And so I'm just trying to be fair here. That I don't really care about defending him or his actions. I just care about letting people know the truth. And when people make these accusations, I have to ask them a question: is the goal to make Trump look bad, or is the goal to get to the truth? Because there's two different sets of answers for that.
Okay, but sometimes they converge. Sometimes the truth is that somebody who says, I have a hunch this is going to go away. Is that someone you would want to have served with? I mean, my God, I don't understand, why someone with your resume, you were in Fallujah, for God's sakes. Would you want someone, a commander, to say that to you, to blame everybody else if something goes wrong, and then to say, I have a hunch the enemy's not going to be in there. Let's attack.
Sure, no, I understand that. So here's how I would describe my answer to that. When bullets are flying past my head, I don't need to raise my voice. And I write about this in my book too. Calm breeds calm, panic breeds panic. Being an optimistic, and exuding positivity and calmness in crisis is exactly how we ask our SEALs to lead. Now, I'm not sure I see a lot of evidence for blaming others, maybe blaming China, although there's a lot of evidence for that. So maybe that's a good place to lay blame. But I did it last Trump week. Blaming, Democrats here, or he's exposing hypocrisy, and maybe we're confusing that with blame. But no, I mean, again, calm breeds calm, and that's how we would lead in the SEAL teams.
Okay, so this is something very instructive, and pay attention to this, people. Pay close attention and take special note of what you saw there. I'm going to tell you about a story that I heard secondhand, a story that Doug Stanhope has related on his podcast, the time when he was in a comedy club, but he was not performing. He might have been one of the performers who was on stage that night. I know, what does this story have to do with Crenshaw and Marr? Bear with me, okay? Stanhope and a bunch of his friends are in the back of the comedy club, and one of their friends is another comedian who's on stage. And I don't remember the name of this comedian, okay? But the comedian's up there just dying on stage. He's telling these horrendous jokes. Nobody's laughing. The room is dead silent for most of it. The guy goes on for 10, 12 minutes, And Stanhope and his comedian buddies in the back of the room are like, what is he doing? Because the guy's just telling these horrible jokes, right? And nobody's laughing, nobody's clapping. People start snickering in the crowd. Some people start booing. And after about 10 or 12 minutes of this, the guy says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't understand what I'm doing here, I know this has been painful to sit through, but what I have just presented to you are all of the jokes. It's all of the jokes from Jay Leno's opening monologues from the past week. And I just wanted to demonstrate to a real audience how that 2-bit hack would do in a real comedy club with a real audience who weren't being coached and prompted to clap for him like trained seals. Apparently the crowd exploded laughing and applauding and everything. And then Stanhope's like, that's when I knew the guy was a genius. And that's a pertinent analogy to what happened here between Dan Crenshaw and Bill Maher. This quarantine, as dark a cloud as it is, there are silver linings all over the place. And you've just witnessed an example of one of them. One of the silver linings to this lockdown is that it's allowing everybody to get a nice long eyeful of how hapless and helpless and just how unintelligent, illogical, and unfunny a lot of these TV hosts really are when they don't have multi-million-dollar productions around them to make them look better than they are. Because a lot of these guys, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, all these guys, they're doing their shows from home now. Even Fredo Cuomo is doing his show from home. And it's obvious they're idiots. They can't even figure out their sound equipment. Most of them are just using the microphone that comes on the webcam, so it sounds terrible. Okay, and there was Fredo was like, and there's no way really that everyone could keep track of all this stuff while running a show. It's like, hello, every single YouTuber knows how to do this. You guys, you can't even have somebody on the phone from your professional production at CNN telling you how to set things up. I mean, anyway, there's that. But then you've got this situation with Bill Maher. Bill Maher has a lot of things, like whenever someone conservative or libertarian walks in to appear on the Bill Maher show, they walk out on that stage and they are completely in the lion's den. They got a crowd that is going to laugh and clap like trained seals to support every little smug look that Bill Maher gives them. That's sometimes Bill Maher won't even, someone will give him a damn good point counter to his position, right? And instead of answering, he'll just like do that smug, arrogant fucking thing with his eyebrows and look at the crowd like, really? This guy? Meh. And the crowd just explodes in applause, right? What happens to Bill Maher when you don't have that? When you don't have the 40 or 50 different crutch mechanisms that Maher has on his show? Well, you see it right there. He's and he just, everything he says, he just ends up hanging himself with. Because Crenshaw, and I'm no particular fan of Crenshaw, I'm okay with him, I guess. But he absolutely nails Bill Maher here. It exposes how reliant propaganda outlets, whether they are news anchors at CNN, MSNBC, or even talk show hosts like this, how reliant they are upon the framing device and mechanism provided by their particular show format. It's all carefully orchestrated to support them and allow them to look like geniuses while heavily stacking the odds against whomever they might be debating. And then this happened.
So in Texas, there was a 6-hour line to vote a couple of weeks ago. It does look like the Republican Party doesn't want people to vote, especially mail-in vote. And there's going to be people now who are afraid to go to the polls because of this disease.
Yeah. So let me explain.
Where do you stand on that?
I'm sorry.
Do you think Republicans are trying to stop people from voting? Do you really want it? Wouldn't you rather lose an election than live in a country where we're not really getting our franchise?
So the lines in Houston here, and those big 6-hour waits you saw, Republicans aren't in charge of those elections. The Democrats are in charge of our county elections here. They run that. The county clerk is a Democrat. Recently won. That's why they're in charge. They've taken full responsibility for those lines, because basically what happened is a lot of machines went down, and that's what caused the lines. There isn't. So first of all, it's not Republicans, it's Democrats in these urban areas that actually run the election system. And second, there was no ill intent. Even I don't think ill intent from Democrats either. There was mistakes made. In Texas, you have 2 weeks to early vote from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 2 weeks straight. You can go anywhere in the county and cast your vote. You don't have to vote on election day. If you're elderly or sick and disabled, you can vote in by mail. No, it's not the case that we don't want people to vote. And of course, that's always the accusation, but it's not really based in evidence. Mail-in ballots do have, there's a break of custody of a vote there. There's if it's not fraudulent, there's at least the possibility for mistakes to be made, and we see that often. I read an op-ed recently from a former Texas member who was going door to door based on voter registration, just knocking on doors, and would find a group of non-U.S. citizens, but they're registered there, or a empty lot, but it's registered. So if you start mailing all of these types of places ballots, well then it's not ill intent, but there's the possibility for a lot of bad things to happen. And so the question we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to, especially from a national level, try to revamp our entire election system and with the potential for all these problems? And for what exactly? And so I don't know if your question is related to COVID-19 or just elections in general. But
well, everything's related to that these days. And there, of course, is a lot to be said about your answer, which is a terrific answer from a press spokesman for that cause.
Oh, well, that's certainly an answer, isn't it? Okay, and now pay close attention to what Mar does next.
But I don't have time to do it now. I hope you can come to our show as we planned sometime, and we will take up this issue of whether Republicans really are protecting your franchise or not.
So I totally could dismantle what you just said, but I don't have time right now. I hope that you will come on my show, and then we'll get into it for sure. What did I just talk about? Yeah, once you come into my lion's den, then I will carefully dismantle you. Or in other words, when I have my producers, my cameramen, my editors, my friendly crowd who are prompted to clap for me like trained seals, then we'll see about this. But just trust me, I could do it right now. I don't have time. This show is taped. They could have gone on as long as he wanted to. It's just Crenshaw answered his question, completely destroyed his points, and now Bill Maher doesn't know what to say to that. So once I have time to, me and my producers can come up with a really good answer, and I can bring you into the lion's den, my lion's den, I'll give it to you, right? And you know what? I kind of hope that happens, because I have a feeling that even in that environment, Crenshaw would still reckon. Yeah, because you kind of kicked my ass, but just trust me, I could totally beat you. Hey, we'll do a rematch. We'll do a rematch at my house with my big brother there, and then I'll show you how bad I could kick your ass. I mean, this is really, really obvious and really pathetic. What you're seeing there in that clip is an illustration of why conservative libertarianism dominates on YouTube. I've talked about this before, right? On Twitter, the left dominates. On YouTube, it's the right. It's conservatives and libertarians. On Facebook, it's kind of in the middle, right? Here's why that is. On Twitter, you've got 140 some odd characters to make your point. There was an article from Christopher Cantwell years and years ago when he was still an anarchist, before he went all crazy white supremacist, right? When he was still an anarchist, he wrote one of my favorite articles ever. He was talking about why it's so pointless to debate with the left on Twitter in one particular part of this article, and he was saying that the heading of that section was, I can't teach you economics in 140 characters. And that says it right there. 140 characters relegates you to the left's favorite thing, the mechanism by which a leftist's brain operates, and that's basically slogans and protest chants. Okay, now on Facebook, you've got a much bigger character limit, but the wordier you are on Facebook, it's the way Facebook is formatted. The wordier you are, the fewer people read through your post to the end. The way Facebook works is, much like Twitter, you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling until something catches your eye. Well, a bunch of text isn't going to catch your eye when you're scrolling on your phone, right? So you're going to go by it unless there's a picture attached, right? Or something that's eye-catching. YouTube, on the other hand, much to their chagrin, has kind of emerged as this place to carefully and deliberately make your arguments. Because think about the interface on YouTube. You go to YouTube and you look for videos to watch. You're not just scrolling, looking for something that catches your eye. To some extent, there is that, where they have suggested videos, but when you click on a video, you're in. You're watching that video now. With Facebook or Twitter, you're just scrolling and scrolling, and something catches your eye. If it loses your interest, boom, you scroll right past it, right? YouTube really just doesn't seem to work that way. So YouTube is a great place for people who have arguments and can make them well. And that's why, in the early days of YouTube, you were limited. I think there was a 10-minute time limit on videos. But that hasn't been the case for a long time. And while in the early days of channels like Free Domain Radio, Stefan Molyneux's channel, when he would have I remember he had videos that were an hour and a half long, and people were like, God, who would sit through that? Well, I did. If it hadn't been for Stefan Molyneux, I probably never would have come to voluntarism. Anyway, yeah, that's what you're seeing there with Crenshaw and Marr. You're seeing just how much of the left's pomp and verve, the left's force and authoritativeness is presentation. It's like, yeah, Bill Maher is perfectly willing to debate anybody so long as they're on his show, on his stage, in front of his audience, with his editors, his camera guys, his producers. He looks like a genius. Imagine in some kind of sci-fi show or something. I'm sure there's a Star Trek episode that has a plot device like what I'm about to describe, but I'm not sure. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But imagine someone is pitted against a local despot, one of the heroes of the show. Let's say Captain Kirk is put into this arena to fight against the king of this particular civilization, right? But the whole thing is set up to cheat for the king. Okay, so Kirk has his arms tied behind his back, and the king is supported by there are professional marksmen up in the gallery who will shoot Kirk with these stun zappers right as he's about to gain an advantage or whatever. I know the analogy I'm thinking of. Thor Ragnarok, where the Grandmaster, played by Jeff Goldblum, has fitted all of the participants in his gladiatorial fights with this device on their neck that will shock them, like a stun collar. And he just sits up there with the remote. And whenever his champion or his picked, his selected person he wants to win the fight starts losing, he shocks the challenger. He shocks the other party so that they lose. And everybody knows this is going on, and yet everybody's still, yay, Grandmaster, right? That's what real time with Bill Maher is. Okay, it's everything is situated so that he completely has the greatest home field advantage in the history of home field advantages. There's an entire gallery of left-wing idiots clapping like seals. It's just like how the Young Turks prefer to debate. I could not believe when Cenk Uygur agreed to... I'm sorry. I know I made a promise. I'll keep it now. Chunk Yogurt agreed to debate Ben Shapiro. I could not believe that it happened, because it happened at Politicon. So you're not walking out to a Young Turks crowd. You're walking out to a crowd that's going to have people of every political stripe. And there were just as many people cheering for Shapiro as were cheering for Yogurt. So you could see it on Chunk's face that he was like, whoa, I'm unfamiliar with this. It was totally different from when when Yogurt debated Dinesh D'Souza, and that really seemed to go against Dinesh D'Souza, in spite of the fact that Dinesh was arguing circles around Chunk Yogurt, right? But it was just because the crowd was booing every syllable that came out of D'Souza's mouth and cheering and clapping like idiots for every little point that Yogurt made, right? Same thing here. This quarantine is really allowing everybody to see, since all these virtue signaling celebrities are doing their shows from their living rooms and running them like absolute jackasses who have never run a webcam before. But they get somebody on there that they try to debate with, and they just end up looking like the blithering idiots that they are. And anyway, that's what you saw here. Overpopulation. It is a serious topic and a serious concern. In fact, it is arguably the most serious concern facing the world today. But the way people tend to view the topic reveals a lot about them, and regardless of whatever other pieces of revealing evidence we can lay out about Bill Gates, his view on the topic of overpopulation is without question the most revealing and most telling thing we can say about the man. So keep that in mind, because I'm going to come back to that presently.